A very good morning and welcome to Morning at 10 TV. If you are just joining us from wherever you are watching, we are coming to you live from the Kampala and Conference Center. This is the Kickstarter discussion, and of course we'll be looking at some of those issues that are pertinent and of course critical for national transformation. And this morning we are looking at government's struggle to improve service delivery and provision of these critical aspects of socio-economic transformation. We say government struggle because it's an ongoing process for all governments to ensure that services to the people are maintained and effectively delivered. Now, that's a bit of a challenge, and of course many stakeholders are always on government's neck saying you're not doing this is not being done the way it's supposed to be done. Government comes up and says, hey, this is what we are doing in time or in the framework that we can, or depending on the resources that we have, and there's always a back and forth. Now, today we want to understand, away from the back and forth, what is being done, what is on the ground, and what can be improved. But before we do, or I introduce my guests this morning, let me just give you a preamble. At national level, accessibility to safe water during the dry season in 2021 was 79%, which is an increase from 75% in 2015. Now, that means growth and development. Boreholes or protected springs and gravity flow schemes in West Nile had 52%. The sub-regions had the highest number of female adults who collected water. You usually see many women doing that. About 5 in every 10 households accessed this safe water within a distance of up to all households that used pipe water and paid for it. This morning, Allana Kembabazi, a programs officer at ISER and Emmanuel Dombo, the communications director at the National Resistance Movement, the party that is in government, are joining us to discuss the issue. A very warm welcome, Allana.
Thank you. Glad to be here today.
And good morning, Honorable Emmanuel Dombo, who's joining us via Zoom.
Our listeners.
Yes, we are coming to you via, or rather you are joining us via Zoom, and I hope you can hear me very, very clearly. Can you?
Yes, for now I can pick you and I can get you.
Yeah. All right, we shall be discussing government's continuing efforts to deliver services that are critical to Ugandans, but allow me give the opportunity to Allana Kembabazi, who is the programs officer at ISER, to bring us up to speed with what is on the ground in terms of service delivery, especially in light of a release of a report by UBOS that apparently supports some of the findings that the organization has been finding out.
Yes, thank you. I think, like every Ugandan knows, we are doing very poorly with regard to service delivery. And it's quite funny because when you read the NRM manifesto, it talks about every Ugandan accessing healthcare, education, all kinds of things that seem very utopian. When I was reading the last one, I remember last year, 2020, we're analyzing it for the elections, and we thought, what world is this? Because when you get on ground, you see what we know. You go to public health facilities, there are drug stockouts. Sometimes the staff are not there. In terms of access to water, we know that only 10% access piped water, which is the UBOS latest survey confirms. Most getting from boreholes, most have to walk long distances. We now have Ebola, we have COVID-19. We need to wash hands. In my father's village, there is no running water. Like, to get running water, we're told, I think, pay close to 10 million. To buy a big pipe to bring it, it doesn't make sense at all. And when it comes to education, many kids are out of school because they cannot afford fees. And the UBOS report does confirm that in the majority of 73% of government schools that are supposed to be free are charging development/building fund fees. So even for the people who are going to public schools because they don't have money and would just hope to be able to study, regardless of ability to pay, they still have to charge these fees. We know that only 28% have classrooms that are reported as adequate, and again, we have seen this. You have seen those classrooms that are quite temporary given the heavy rains we are facing right now. And then, of course, when it comes to electricity, we know that there are very many parts of the country that do not have access to electricity up to now. The rural electrification program has been sort of just on very shaky feet. Even people try to connect and to wire their houses, they have been waiting for years. I know in areas of Mitoma, Kashensho, and other places in the west, there is no electricity there in terms of people who are not able to pay the private cost of 700 something for private connection. But we also know that in the West Nile, it's been a huge issue about the persistent power blackouts and lack of electricity.
Okay.
So from a service delivery perspective, as all Ugandans know, we're not doing well. And the U-Boss latest report confirms that, which then raises the question of what is the government doing?
Exactly. Honorable Emmanuel Dombo, you've had there a question from Allana Kembabazi, Programs Officer at ISER. A report is out and it's grim reading. What is the government doing?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Madam Kembabazi, for your rejoinder. When you look at the National Service Delivery Survey report and the indicative areas that were surveyed, and when you look at the comparison between what has happened in the 2021 report and in the previous reports that had been...
Oh dear.
A marked improvement in the areas. And when you look at accessibility to water, it has improved. But what is true also, and this is an area that we need to focus on as government, especially those in the supervision of the delivery of government programs and services, is the issue of governance. When you look at the issue of governance and the perception about corruption, you can see that delivery of government programs have been hampered by the nature of corruption that is being practiced in many local governments and government departments. You know, the government is implementing a decentralization where the implementation of many of the projects that were surveyed were decentralized and is being implemented through the local governments. But unfortunately, when you look at the ability or the will by the officers at the local governments to do supervision and ensure that people can get access to good education, good health.
Okay, we seem to be having a little bit of connection trouble there. Speaking to Emmanuel Dombo, the Director of Communications at the National Resistance Movement. He was speaking about decentralization. I'm told he's back. Honorable, can you continue with that submission?
Yes, I was saying that when you look at those areas and you see the implementation of government programs at local government level, you can see that the effect of corruption is progressively affecting service delivery. This corruption can be seen from the report itself, the public perception. When you look at the accountability for the monies that have been given, you see that there are areas that are wanting, and there is a link between service delivery and public perception about corruption and the poor government accountability. Even when you go to Parliament and you look at the Auditor General's reports, they really confirm some of the issues that have been brought up by this National Service Delivery report. And it really calls on us, because for us as the National Resistance Movement, we came out with a manifesto. The party brought a manifesto addressing people's problems based on the National Development Plan. After establishing the levels of poverty, accessibility to water and education, and what should be done, and government or the elections allow NRM to fund our manifesto using public resources in order to transform the lives of the people. And unfortunately, some of these implementations have been affected because of that. But generally, the performance has been improving, although the improvements do not measure to what would have been expected. Because when you come to water coverage, ordinarily we should have been at perhaps 90%, but access to water during the dry season is only at 79%. And this is very poor.
All right, Honorable. Allow me interject, Honorable. You speak of the fact that the way you paint the picture of corruption and how it affects local governance, local government and governance in general across the country, it's as if you as the government are not in this frame of the picture and you are outside of it, and more like you are also lamenting, yet we know for sure that the running of government and state is now the responsibility of the national resistance movement, and you ought to have mechanisms that first and foremost put governance in the spot and transparency is ensured. Why are you terribly failing on this?
Well, first of all, I want to speak as a spokesperson of the NRM, the party in power.
Yes.
When we were implementing the manifesto, we used the civil servants. We don't use the structures. You get the money, you get it through the Ministry of Finance, using civil servants, you get it to the sub-counties, the accountants, use the chief administrative officers. When you get to execution of justice, you rely on the policemen, you rely on the judiciary and the magistrates. Not that all these people are members of the national resistance movement, but they are public servants whom we must rely on, even to investigate the corrupt people. When you go to the land office, and you see how people have been crying, and there's something that affects service delivery. Yes, it is true, we're in the government, and we're trying as much as possible to ensure that we overcome corruption. But in order to do this,
yes, very quickly, Honorable,
rely on the public servants, and in many cases, they have been undermining us and failing to deliver on what is expected of them.
All right, thank you very much for that submission. We shall be returning to you very shortly, but allow me engage Allana Kembabazi on what you have just said. Honorable Dombo is lamenting and perhaps telling us that they understand, as the National Resistance Movement, the party in power, that there's a lot that needs to be done or is not being done as ought to be, and seems to be appealing to some other sector players to ensure that that help comes in the running of government. Do you make sense of that narrative?
No, I mean, you're the ruling party, and you brought in this manifesto, and at this point you have probably consolidated more power than ever before. You in terms of sort of the influence you have against through the organs of government, through all the organs of government. And I think what he said was things have improved. But actually not quite. The report, for example, shows that the quality of healthcare in public facilities has stagnated since 2015. That is unacceptable. We've had multiple, now we have Ebola, we have COVID. Like, if anything, at minimum, the quality should have improved. So there's a lot of stagnation, like you say, but Ugandans have been saying this for a long time. So government cannot be lamenting with us. He has talked about corruption, but they have failed to curb corruption. It is a fact. We even go ahead and enable it to happen sometimes at a systematic level through things like illicit financial flows that ISER has a whole report about. And when you put aside even issues of corruption, when they were launching this report, the minister, Honorable Golobi, said investment, he alluded to the fact that if there is no investment, how are you going to expect service delivery? And that's the reality. Let us look at the investment. How much do you actually put in these sectors? Water, which gets 3%. Health has never got more than 10%. How much money are you actually putting there? You go ahead and borrow in our name, And right now you're spending more on servicing that debt than you spend on health, education, water combined, and Ugandans are not seeing what is happening on the ground. And you could argue that they may say they have many issues, they can't finance this. And ISER disagrees. We have a report out on progressive taxation to fund public services. If you actually make the wealthy pay their fair share of tax, which they don't, as our report documents, and you make these multinational corporations pay their fair share of tax, then we can have quality public services. So it's a two-part process. You have to have financed the public services, and you also have to supervise them. Because now, on the one hand, even the money that you give, a lot of it, the Auditor General's reports, there's one on health, which is just an indictment of the health sector, in terms of how much is lost, in terms of the perennial issues that we have seen year after year. And the reality is government is not taking decisive action. If you talk about corruption, who have you brought to book, right? Not small fish, right? When there was a lot of shouting about COVID-19, who did you bring and say, okay, we have come and found that, you know, and it has gone all the way up. When you sit and talk about the land ministry being corrupt, now if you're lamenting as leaders in power, what are the rest of us supposed to do?
I would love you to ask the spokesperson of the National Resistance Movement two specific questions, especially in light of the fact that you are vastly knowledgeable, given that you have all these reports with you, including the latest from UBOS. What questions, if you have two very direct ones to Honorable, can you pose?
Yes. One, how are we going to actually see investment at the level these sectors need in the public health sector, public education sector, or whatever? Because the report is very clear, by the way, that the majority of Ugandans do not rely on private, and the majority are using the public facilities, public health, public education.
Okay.
So at what point are we going to see you people come and actually give the money that is needed? Not just saying I have increased, but the money that is needed. Number two, what actions are you going to take to make sure the wealthy and the multinational corporations are paying their fair share of tax? What kind of tax proposals that are affecting the poor?
Honorable, take it away.
Much for those concerns and those questions. First of all, I want to tell you that UBOS is a government department. And for them to have come up and given a clear report of what has been happening, you can see the honesty on reporting, and for us this is very good because it's not being guided by corruption. This is something that is fantastic. The second one, what we can do as a government is that the public investment of resources in Parliament should be guided by the need that comes out of reports like this one. It is therefore incumbent for our members of Parliament who are going to appropriate money for service delivery to be aware of what the previous allocations has done, what the current needs are, so that it is not their perception and desire to enhance their constituencies, but it should be guided by need on the ground. For instance, recently I was in Kasese for the by-elections, and I was so surprised to see that there are many sub-counties in Kasese that do not have a single secondary school. Yet there are many areas in Uganda where in more than one sub-counties, there are more than one secondary schools that are public. So in investing money in the public schools or in Uganda, we should begin looking at the need as demonstrated on the ground, so that public resources are invested deliberately to address a need as shown in the various surveys by the government agencies like UBOS. This is something that should be done. The second one is that we need enhanced training, because we have passed very good laws to fight against corruption. Even the budget of the judiciary has since been enhanced, and the judicial officers are better paid and better facilitated. Now that this one has been done by government to invest in that law and sector order, it is important that the judicial officers begin enhancing their investigating systems on the reporting mechanisms, collection of evidence, and also appearing of witnesses in order to ensure that those big fish you are talking about who are corrupt, that they can be convicted in the courts of law. Because unless people bring evidence, then definitely we shall all be lamenting without proper cause being done.
All right, thank you very much there. You talk about the aspect of the government's ability to investigate the corrupt and bring them to book. Recently, we got to hear from the IGG, Betty Olive Kamya, about the fact that funding of the organization to be able to do its work is insufficient. We understand that 56 billion Uganda shillings that is given to the IGG to do her work goes to operational costs, paying salaries, buying fuel, and of course some of the cars that the officials do drive. Is it sustainable in a country like Uganda that needs to do a lot more in fighting corruption for an organization like the IG, the Inspectorate of Government, to go for purchase of cars and paying of high salaries to officials even before thinking of the direct actions that need to be done in order to fight corruption? Honorable, that's your question.
The challenge we have right now is that there is a multiplicity of agencies in government that are doing the same work without complementing one another. We have the Parliament of Uganda, where resources are being put to enhance the committees of Parliament to do oversight. But there has been a very poor linkage between these committees and the other agencies of government. For instance, recently there was a corruption case in the Ministry of Lands, where some people were fraudulently compensated for land which they did not have. Parliament, through the COSASE committee, investigated this matter. But when you look at what the findings have been and what government has done with these lawyers and those individuals who participated in the corruption, not much has been done. Yet, the findings were very obvious, and one would have expected the course of action to be taken.
All right.
But what is true is that the IGG has come up clearly to say her office is not ably facilitated. Now this should go to the committee, the Legal and Parliamentary Affairs Committee, which is directly responsible for superintending and supervising the work of the judiciary and the work of the IGG.
All right.
The committee should appreciate that in the next budget cycle, they should allocate enough money that should enable. And then there should also be reporting benchmarks that when money is forgiven, what is it going to show that the facilitation, because money may be given.
Okay.
But how are we going to measure the corresponding outcome?
Accountability.
In order to be able.
Yeah. All right, thank you for that submission. We shall be returning to you very shortly about the bloated nature of the public service budget and how business is conducted there. But allow me to come to Allana Kembabazi. Let's avoid the pitfalls of lamentation. Many times, civil society organizations are waxing lyrical. No doubt about that, about what government hasn't done, what government is doing wrong. We get very little in terms of blueprints on how government must work or what it should adopt. So much so that even what is brought to the fore, we do not get to know exactly where or who is approached or engaged to be able to find these particular solutions. So much so that we begin to see civil society organizations buried in careerism. If you're helping government fight corruption, ISER and the stakeholders that you are working with, list for us a litany, if you can, of options that can be adopted to fight corruption, improve governance, ensure service delivery is on point.
Okay. First of all, I don't think it's a civil society fight. I think that as we have a coalition on quality public services, and it is not made up of civil society. We actually have a people's manifesto for public services, and it is regular folks, especially young people. Remember, 8 out of 10 of people in this country are below 35 years.
Yep.
Yeah, and they're thinking about the country they are going to be living for their kids. And it's not a pretty one. So one, we must see, first of all, I disagree. I think that first of all, everything comes down to political will. That's why I disagree with him. Okay. Because I have seen when there is political will to do things, they move very quickly. And the political will has to come from the top. From the top. Otherwise, there will be lamentation. They're well-meaning civil servants in different areas trying to create change. But if there's no systematic political will to improve public services, to curb corruption so we can get the money, we will not see change. But number two, in terms of concrete proposals, we have talked about progressive taxation because you need money. Yeah. So first of all, like I've said, make the wealthy pay their fair share of tax. Make sure you're getting rid of these tax waivers. These tax waivers here, you find that they could finance some of our budgets multiple times. And they're given to companies. You do not see what they are actually doing in a concrete way to improve the livelihoods of Ugandans, right? And the benefits. The IMF, ISER has also research on this that has shown they are not good. They're not helping us. We should get that money, put it in public services, and then take measures to curb corruption. He talked about capacity building. For example, when you come to things like illicit financial flows, where, man, there is corruption that we know is behind the books, but there is somewhere we even structure deals to enable money to leave this country. And that's when you need a whole of government approach. You have the Financial Intelligence Authority. So this recent legislation they passed on anti-money laundering. So you have a number of organs, IGG, that should be working together and are coordinated. And they're getting some capacity building right now. What we need to see are some of these results coming out. And then number three, engaging with the people, like talking to them. There should be participation. He has talked about a sub-county with no schools, many sub-counties without schools, and there are so many without, which means there's a huge gap in the consultations. Our budget process should be bottom up. So when you see that happening and you see an MP coming and announcing, I brought you mattresses, I brought you a school, it is because the government has decided to step back and there's no participation of people, because people will tell you over and over, for us we get these reports, please help us, there's no school here, there's no, so getting back to the people. And when you listen to the people, it means you go back and you actually listen. You used to have barazas. What did you get from those barazas? Then people tell you there were no schools, or there were drug stockouts. So then what action took place, right? That accountability, that two-way accountability we're not seeing. So for me, around those three things. And the last thing, of course, is curbing our appetite for debt. As long as we just keep borrowing and things are done very quickly, you know, they are approved very quickly, or you're guaranteeing loans like you did for Loboa very quickly, that money we are going to have to pay back. And right now we are feeling the effect because government is spending more money paying back debt than health, education, and other social services.
All right, thank you very much, Allana Kembabazi, for that submission. Let me return to the Honorable Emmanuel Dombo, Communications Manager at the National Resistance Movement. And I bring something that I believe is an example that can help the local out there, be it in Koboko, be it in Masindi, or even Butaleja, your home area, Honorable. If, for example, a road is done or tarmacked and ensured that everything is flowing properly, it means a district officer who is either DHO, that is the district health officer, DEO, district education officer, can quickly move from one spot to the other, or even on a motorbike, instead of buying these officials SUVs every 6 months for them to be able to go through these very bad roads. Isn't working on these roads more of an advantage in terms of economies of scale and helping the entire communities out there to be able to get the services that they want?
What is true and you're talking about is the rationalization of the resources once we get them. Yeah. And this responsibility directly lies with the members of parliament who do the appropriation depending on the budget proposals that have been placed by government. Previously, I know President Museveni has complained where the members of parliament have readjusted the budget beyond or totally changing the impressions or the objectives that government was trying to reach. I remember at one time we did that, and when I was still in parliament, and there was a near crisis between parliament and the executive, and that is how the PACOB committee was introduced in order to enable the party participate in the budget process in the preliminary stages in order to avoid the crisis that had come at that time, where Parliament attempted to rudimentary change the allocation of resources and even changing the objectives that the government had come up to address. That is something that must be done. But like I did observe, in Uganda, we are very good at doing research and then writing very good reports about the findings. Where we have had challenges is how do we utilize the information that we have got in order to inform the decision-making that we do.
All right. Wrap it up, Honorable.
For instance, this report here is very indicative of areas that progressively require additional funding. When you get on the perception, Madam Kembabazi was talking about our budgetary process. By the way, Uganda's budget process is one of the most consultative, which involves all the people. But at times the consultations just send in the seminars.
Honorable.
People are called for budget for the budget conferences at the districts.
Yeah. All right, Honorable.
For the budget conference at the national level, they get very good objectives.
Good.
But when it comes to your budget allocation, the members of parliament who sit in parliament, they can, for instance, in a year, when the government is going to grant aid to schools, you find members of parliament on the education committee sharing more schools to be taken to their respective constituencies, or the members of the health committee, they can share amongst themselves the health facilities or enhanced budget for health facilities, instead of being guided by the need which is within the population, but then the allocation gets skewed because every member of parliament is trying to do something that will enable them to get re-elected in the subsequent elections.
All right. Thank you very much.
There is need, therefore, to reconcile and harmonize the public need as observed on the ground with the public allocation of resources as executed in the parliamentary works.
All right, thank you very much, Honorable Emmanuel Dombo there, speaking to us via Zoom, spokesperson, or rather communications director, I must be very specific, of the National Resistance Movement Party that is in government. Let me return to you and wrap this up. You've had Mr. Honorable Dombo speak there emphatically, but also revealing something that is very poignant, the fact that those who have the power to act don't actually have the power to act.
Yeah, and I think you could see a bit of that as well with the rationalization. You talked about rationalization. Remember, when we passed the education budget, it seemed to have increased. Then they went, despite Parliament passing this, they reduced the amounts that were actually being given capitation grants. They withheld some of the money, which meant schools struggled, passed on fees to people. Which then made me wonder, who has the power here? If Parliament has the power to appropriate, and then for you come without consulting Parliament and decide to interrupt those releases and distort service delivery without talking to Parliament, then we have real issues, particularly when it comes to public services. But for me, getting back to it at the end of the day, this is a social contract you have with us. They are not favors. Ugandans don't care if it is MPs or government or the judiciary. For us, we want to see drugs in our public health facilities and well capacitated, and our kids to go to school regardless of ability to pay, and access to water, electricity. These are basics in this time. This time where I can talk to Honorable Dombo virtually, I don't know where he is. Surely people should be able to access these things. So as government, you need to get it together. As the ruling party, you are failing on your manifesto. And if you are really committed to seeing this through, then you should listen to people, particularly the young people. We have realized that public services and issues of economic stability are very critical to maintaining sustainable peace. And we must make sure that we invest in them, give maximum available resources, which means progressive taxation, curbing illicit financial flows and corruption, and just really regulating any other actor in that sector, because you're government.
All right. Allana Kembabazi, Programs Officer at ISER, many thanks for the insight and the perspectives on Uganda's situation and how we can go forward in improving service delivery. And of course, many thanks to the Honorable Emmanuel Dombo, the Communications Director at the National Resistance Movement there, who joined us via Zoom for this discussion. I hope you've been emboldened in terms of what you think can be done to improve services in your community, and on a personal level, you should be able to also demand for accountability, especially from the leaders that you have access to, because if you can't, then it is very difficult for somebody else to begin the process for you. I'm Chris Higenyi. That will do it for the Kickstarter discussion this morning, but do stay with us. We shall be, of course, bringing you youth involvement in the development of the nation. Where do you stand as a young person in ensuring that Uganda becomes better? Priscilla Regina Naloga will be at hand for that. Stay with us.